Okay, welcome back again YouTube to part 3 in my series of videos on the R24 and helping you to get the best out of it. Apologies first of all for those of you who were looking for that very distinctive, some would say disgusting tablecloth that has become a feature of parts 1 and 2 in this series. I've decided to do this part 3 in a different location entirely. So I'm currently crouched on a child's plastic chair in my son's bedroom. We've got a bit of a house full at the moment, so this will just be for the introduction part. Don't worry, we'll be flicking directly to the R24 so you don't have to look at me for much longer. We'll be doing that shortly. I'm actually going to refer to a few notes here that I've had to make for this part 3 because part 3 is a bit of a mashup. It's a bit of a miscellaneous subject area. It's going to cover some mop-ups of some things that I felt either weren't covered adequately in parts 1 and 2 were just mentioned, for example, and weren't looked at properly, along with a few other sorts of bits and bobs that don't really justify video on their own, but nonetheless it's useful to know that the feature is available and sort of how to get into it. So I'm going to refer to my notes here as I talk for the first few minutes before we actually get into the R24 itself and start looking at some of the menu functions. So the first issue I want to talk about is the use of batteries in the device. I did mention in earlier videos that the device does run off batteries. It's 6 AA pencil batteries, the standard size that you would get in a Walkman or something like that. Showing my age there. Now, you may think, why bother? I'm always going to have it plugged in. I would advise you to, regardless of that, put batteries into it. Two main reasons. One is that the date and time function that you program into the device in the system menu, which gives you a nice date and time stamp on your recordings, will be retained without mains power. If you don't have batteries in, the minute you unplug the device and switch it off, you lose those system settings. So if you have batteries in the device will retain the date and time settings. And actually, I've just discovered that even on changing the batteries, which I've just done, the date and time is still retained for a short period of time. I think you've got a window of several minutes to get those batteries changed over before you lose the date and time settings. Now, it's not the end of the world, I know, but it's a bit of a pain to have to program it all in again if keeping a log of the date and time of your recording is important to you. It's important to me because it helps me organise my folders and my structure in my DAW and on my hard drive that I use for editing and stuff. So just something to bear in mind, use batteries. That's the first reason, is to retain the system settings like the date and time. The second reason is, and I've no experience of this myself, but I'm led to believe that sometimes if you are mid-recording, for example at a gig or something of that nature, and the mains power is interrupted by being inadvertently switched off by the sound engineer, for example, or with a power surge or a spike or whatever, that can corrupt your entire recording. So if you're an hour into your gig and this happens, it could be a bit of a disaster. And as I said, I'm led to believe from the forums that I've read anyway, that if you have batteries in the device, that won't happen, because if the mains power is interrupted, then the batteries kick in and your recording will continue. Now, don't hold me to that, probably worth experimenting, I would think, if it's that crucial. But that's another reason why batteries is advisable to have in your R24. I would recommend you do that. Third reason for me personally, because sometimes it's quite nice just to sit on the settee with it on your lap doing a bit of mixing or whatever without messing about getting the mains lead out. And the batteries do last for many hours, I think 4 or 5 hours anyway. So they are worth, they are worth having in, and for the price of them, you could even use rechargeables, I guess. For the price of them, it's probably something that you need to consider. I did mention that the batteries also provide the phantom power function for your condenser mics that are plugged into the inputs. What I didn't mention when I talked about phantom power was the selectable voltages for the phantom power. You can have normal regular phantom power would run at around 48 volts, which is what a lot of mixing desks will supply, but the R24 menu system allows you to reduce that voltage down to, I think, 12 volts or 24 volts or something like that. Again, check that in the menu settings, but the point is you can adjust the voltage level of the phantom power that's being supplied to your condenser mic, so just bear that in mind. Another thing to talk about is the faders and how they work, the little sort of nuances with the faders on the R24. You may have noticed in my earlier videos that sometimes when I'm switching between tracks or banks and showing you, for example, on the swap function that I did in the last video, where this is a blank track, look, and here's where the track has been swapped to, that I sort of wiggle the faders up and down a bit first. The reason for that, and if you go into the track menu of your device, you'll see that all the faders are actually doing is giving the device a value between, I think it's 0 and 100, giving the device a numerical value of the level or the volume of that track. Now if for example you're on track 1 and you have the fader in a certain position equating to a numerical value of say 60, and then you flick to bank 2 and bank 2, so track 1 would now be track 9, and then mess about with the fader then in that position and say push the fader up towards the top of its travel. When you return to bank 1 and track 1, the fader value for track 1 is still at 60, which is what it was when you left it, but yet the fader is now at the top of its travel because you've messed about with it for track 9. I hope this is making sense. And so what you need to do when you come back into track 1 is to catch, I can't think of a better way of putting it really, to catch the numerical value, to let the recorder know where the fader is now on track 1. Because when you hit playback or whatever, track 1 will still play back at 60, the level that it was at. But as I said, your fader could be right at the bottom, it could be right at the top of its travel. The track value has already been set at 60. The fader value for the level has already been set at 60 when you were previously messing about with it. So you get used to doing that. I mean, if you think about it, the only way Zoom could have got around this would be to have used motorized faders. In other words, when you switch back to bank 1 using tracks 1 to 8, the faders automatically travel to the position where they were last at. But obviously that's going to be very expensive, probably going to involve a bigger device to incorporate the motors and all that kind of thing. So really it's a small price to pay for a cheap device that's small and light and easy to use, non-motorized faders. What that means is you're essentially the motor, so you need to catch the value with the fader. So if you're switching between banks of tracks or switching between recordings or whatever, just bear that in mind, that the numerical fader value that you can have a look at incidentally in the track menu on your device, and you can actually adjust it, the fader value with the cursor keys as well, up and down or left and right, whichever it is, I don't know, I can't remember. But just bear that in mind. If you're going back into a recording where a fader was set at a certain level, and then you've gone into another recording, another project where you've messed about with that same fader and put it on a different level, when you go back into that first project, the fader value will still be what it was when you left, which won't correspond to where the fader is currently on its course of travel, because you've now moved it. So just, I hope that makes sense. I don't know if I'm explaining that very well, but that's the reason why you sometimes need to catch that level with the fader if you've moved it between tracks or between projects. So I hope that clears that up. I've been asked a question about saving, how the thing saves your tracks, takes, projects, files, etc. Saving is automatic on the R24 as you go along. So you record a track and it's saved. When you hit stop on the recording, it's saved. You'll sometimes get the little hourglass, which will be the thing saving or doing something anyway. So you can kind of confirm it with that. Whenever you do anything on the R24, for example, changing project or leaving the project you're on and creating a new project, it always saves what you've just done. So it's very difficult really to use the R24 and inadvertently not save something, because it's doing it for you in the background, assuming of course you have a memory card in, and it does only save to the memory card. You can transfer those files onto a USB stick later on, I'll explain that, but while it's saving as it's operating, it is only saving to the memory card. So my advice to you would be this: 32 gigs nowadays is very cheap. It's the maximum size card the firmware in the R24 will currently allow and recognise and work with. So get yourself a 32 gig and then you're not worried about running out of space. for a while anyway. So when you switch the device off, for example, you'll get the hourglass, and it won't switch off immediately. It will chug away for a few seconds, and then the screen will go dark. And that's because it's saving what you've been working on. When you flick between projects, it saves whatever it is you've been doing. When you've just finished recording a track or tracks, it will save what you've just recorded. So to those of you who have asked me about the saving function, it's all automatic. It goes on without you having to think about it. So there's no save button on the R24, it just does it for you. So don't be worrying, essentially. Okay. I would also advise you to make, if you got the R24 new and you got the memory stick that I showed you in the first video with all the drum loops on that, there's a couple of gigs worth of drum loops on there which are very useful. I would, if I were you, make a backup copy of those loops. Stick it in your laptop and clone the USB stick, because if anything happens to it, then you've not lost all your drum loops. And there are posts on these forums from R24 owners who have misplaced or corrupted their memory stick and are asking other users, could anyone please provide me with a copy of the drum loops. You can probably get them online as well from a download somewhere. I'm sure, I think Kevin Selby on the Zoom Forum US page provides them, but it's a lot of hassle when really you could just back them up very quickly and easily yourself. So I'd advise you to do that, back up your drum loops on your memory stick. Okay. The use of the R24 as a live desk. Now this was a live mixer. This was a query that I had myself and put it up on the boards once, because I got to thinking, you know, if I'm doing a small gig, singer-songwriter, acoustic guitar and a mic, for example, or a mic and an acoustic bass and an acoustic guitar or something of that nature. I've got a big Mackie 12-channel desk. Do I really want to be dragging that big desk along to a small gig like that at somebody's house or a small bar or something like that? And I got to thinking, well, you know, the Zoom R24 is a very small, light, portable device. Could you use it as a live mixer at a push? And the answer is yes, you can. And really all you need to know is that you use your inputs in the usual way, you set your gain in the usual way. The main outs, the left and right stereo main outs of the device would be feeding either a power amp and speakers for a PA or powered speakers for a PA. And the only thing you need to bear in mind really is that you need the tracks that you're using, so tracks 1 and 2 maybe, microphone and acoustic guitar, you need those armed for record. So you need those with the red lights on above the track faders in order to hear the output, and then you monitor in the usual way using the fader for each track and the master red fader up to unity gain or thereabouts, depending on what volume level you're looking for. So yes, you can use it as a live desk at a push, but just make sure you have the tracks armed for record, or else you won't hear out through the PA what it is that's being played. You don't have to be recording, but just have them armed for record. So that's using it as a live desk. For everything else on this list that I'm going to talk about in this episode, I really need to show you the actual R24 itself and the menus and the screen. So I'm going to stop here and we're going to get into now some other subject areas, and I'm going to look at stereo linking and why we do it, stereo linking of tracks and why we do it. I'm going to look at recording modes, overwrite mode versus always new mode, and what the advantages and disadvantages are of each. I'm going to look at the metronome briefly and just how to set tempos, which I haven't covered yet. Assigning files to tracks, and maybe panning an EQ, setting marks, the A/B repeat function, which is quite useful, punching in and punching out, bouncing. And then in another video entirely, probably episode 4, I'm going to look at the insert effect and dry versus wet recording, because the insert effect really does justify a video on its own. So I'm going to stop the video now, we're going to take a look at the R24, and we're going to start off with record modes and overwrite versus always new. Okay, so record modes on the R24. You've two choices, and I'm going to explain what they do and why you would choose either, because there are sort of benefits and drawbacks with both. They can be found in the project menu. So if you go ahead and press project here, you get into the project settings menu, which we've looked at in a previous video. And the very final, where are we? Get to the top here, right? Okay. If we scroll down from the top, the very last, the last but one setting is record, REC. So if we go ahead and hit enter and go into the record settings menu, you'll see we've an option at the top to adjust the bit length. We've a second option to modify the behavior of what happens to a track when it's being bounced to, and I'll cover that later on when I look at the bounce function. But the very last of the three options there is record mode, REC mode, and at the moment that's set to overwrite. Now what that essentially means is every time I do a new recording on one of these tracks, so let's imagine we have a vocal mic coming in on input number 5 here. I record a version of a song, and I get to the end and I'm not that happy with it because I messed up the vocal halfway through, for example, or I was a bit out of tune on the verse, or whatever it might be. I want to try again. If this is set to overwrite, when I do a second take on that input there, it will overwrite, funnily enough, what's already on the track. So at the end of the second recording, I will, the second version of the vocal, I will still end up with only one file, which is the most recent one that I've done. I hope that makes sense. So every time you record, you're overwriting what's gone before. You're recording over it. Now, if that's not a problem to you, then leave the record set in the record mode at overwrite. But do bear in mind that you will be losing earlier takes, earlier recordings, being replaced or overwritten by the more current ones. Okay. The advantage of using overwrite, I guess, is that you're not using up much memory card space. It's the most economical use of your memory card. So if you're only stuck with a small memory card, it might be the most advisable setting to go for, as long as you understand you are recording over what you've done before every time you make a new recording. A far safer setting, if we just twist the jog wheel to the right there just once, the record mode has now changed to always new. Now that means that every time you do a recording, it's creating a new file, which will allow you, for example, to have multiple takes on the vocal, which later on then you can choose the one that you prefer the most, and it will retain all the other takes that you've done. So every time you hit record, it's creating a new file and leaving the original files untouched. So you could end up with 6 or 8 or 10 files. Now only one can be assigned to track 5 at any one time, but when you go into the menus looking at your files, you'll see the other 4 or the other 5 or the other 6 are still sitting there available to be assigned to the track, so you can listen to it. It doesn't overwrite them like the previous setting. Obviously the safer setting, because using that you can never accidentally record over something that you've already done. You're always creating a new file. Obviously the trade-off then is that you're going to be using up a lot more of your memory card space than would be the case if you use the overwrite mode. So if you have a large memory card, a 32 or a 16 gig, then using always new is probably the way to go. It's safe. Yes, you're using a lot more memory space, but you have a lot more memory space to play with. So if you're using a small card, just bear in mind, if you have this set to always new, it's going to really eat up your memory space a lot quicker than the overwrite mode would do. And all you need to do, as with everything on the Zoom R24, when you've selected the mode you want, just exit out of it. There's no need to save it. it will be retained. Your last setting will be retained. Go into projects again just to double check. It's already on record mode, and there it is set to always new, which is what I changed it to a few moments ago. Okay, so that's the record mode setting, overwrite versus always new, and the pros and cons of each. Okay then, the next item on our list is stereo linking. What is it and why do you need it? Why should you do it, and how does it work in practice on the R24? You can stereo linking a track is essentially, these are at the minute 8 mono tracks. Now, some input sources that you may be using for your recordings, such as keyboards, drum machines, sequencers or samplers, this kind of thing, may actually have a stereo output, 2 channels left and right, standard stereo output, and the R24 allows you to record in stereo, but you have to tell the R24 that you are linking together 2 mono tracks and creating 1 stereo track from them. Okay, and the way you do that is again in the over here in the pan EQ option, this button here. Again, look down the brief reminder of what's in the menu settings for that button, and you'll see the last but one here is called stereo link. So go ahead and press that, and all the way down to stereo link, ST link, which at the moment is off. It's set to off, and at the moment you'll remember we're in the pan EQ menu. We're looking at track 1. That's what it says here on the top of the screen, and that's what it says here lit up in orange at the top of the track. So that's the only track we're looking at the moment. When you stereo link on the R24, it links together an adjacent pair of odd and even tracks. So you can only stereo link tracks 1 and 2, tracks 3 and 4, tracks 5 and 6, tracks 7 and 8, and then on with your bank switches, tracks 9 and 10, 11 and 12, you get the idea. So you can only stereo link adjacent pairs of odd and even numbered tracks. So you need to decide first of all which tracks you want to link together to become 1 stereo track. So let's, in this example, pick tracks 5 and 6. So we'll go ahead and select track 5. So the light's on track 5, this says track 5. We're on the stereo link option. We're going to turn the jog wheel to the right, 1 click, and that's now set stereo link to on, and you'll see track 6, the light has come on automatically. Both lights are on, and the display tells us here we're looking at tracks 5 and 6 because it's now linked together 5 and 6 and made 1 stereo track. So when you import that track into your DAW, you will see it as a stereo file rather than 2 mono files. And I think I'm right in saying, and I'll just double check this with you while we're actually on here. Pan, here we go. No, forget that. I was going to say pan set to hard left and hard right. I'm not actually too sure about that. You'll have to check that up in the manual. So we've linked together. We've turned stereo link on here, and we've linked together this pair odd and even tracks. And again, we can exit out of that. There's no drama, and these tracks now behave as a pair. So if we arm them for playback, they both come on together. I'll turn these off so you can see it more easily. So they're both off. Okay, so arm them for record, they both come on together. Arm them for playback, they both come on together because it's 1 stereo track that's going to behave as 1 track. And excuse me. The thing you need to know now is that this fader on the even number, it's always the even number, is now redundant. That won't do a thing. This fader here will control both left and right channels, both tracks 5 and 6. So you only adjust the monitoring level or the level that you want for recording when you're mixing down. You only adjust it with that 1 fader. You can leave this one alone, it doesn't do a thing, it doesn't affect anything. Okay. So you just use the 1 fader. Now you can stereo link after the fact. You can stereo link at any stage. You don't have to set it up from the beginning. It's a good idea, I guess, for project management purposes. If you know you're going to be using a stereo input source, then think about that in advance, because it does take up 2 of your tracks. but you have got 24 to play with, so it's hardly an issue, I wouldn't have thought. But that's how you stereo link, and you create one stereo. You can then unlink those tracks if they were recorded. You can go back into the Pan EQ menu. I'll go up to stereo link because it's going to be quicker. Yeah, there it is, stereo link. Both tracks are selected, tracks 5 and 6, and I'm going to select that to off, stereo link to off. Oh. And now the light's gone out on track 6, it's only lit on track 5. We're looking at track 5 because it says at the top, and track 6 operates independently again of track 5. So that's your stereo link function. And as I said, you would probably want to use that for a stereo input source such as a keyboard, drum machine, sequencer, whatever. You could also use it if, for example, you were going to mix down, we'll look at this later on in another video, but if you were going to mix down a live mic'd acoustic drum kit, you could mix it down to one stereo file, and you've got your pan and an EQ all set up before you do the bounce down from multiple drum tracks down to one stereo drum track. And then what you get in, I suppose, is the stereo image then of the drum kit, the toms rolling from left to right, the cymbals in various locations in the stereo field, all that kind of thing. So that's another example of where you could use it. Where we've used it as a band recently is when we've been practicing at home. Our drummer has a set of Roland V drums, which give a stereo output, a left and right stereo output. So we've put him in to 2 tracks on the R24 directly from the drum module of the V drums, and stereo linked the tracks and recorded it as one stereo file. You could record it separately as 2 mono files, a left and a right, but by linking them together in stereo, then they behave as one track, and it's probably a bit easier then to mess about with it. Okay, so that's stereo linking, how it works, why you would want to do it, and what then happens with the R24 when it's selected. Okay, now we're going to look at the metronome function on the R24. Again, how to use it and why you would want to use it, the practical applications of using the metronome. Because in these videos I don't just like to show you how to switch it on or off, for example, on any particular function. I also like to then give examples, practical examples of how you might apply that in your particular setting. So in other words, what does it mean in real life? Okay, so the metronome function, I did mention it in previous videos that it's there. I talked about this little grey setup here, the switch and the dial. Just to recap, the switch selects whether the metronome click goes to the main out of the device and the headphones, or just the headphones. So you could have the whole band playing with the drummer sat there with his headphones on. He's the only one that's hearing the click, which is quite a useful thing, I guess, when you're recording together as a band. So that selects main output and headphones, or just the headphones. That doesn't turn it on or off. You do that from within the menu. I'll show you in a second. And this grey dial here simply adjusts whether the balance between the volume of the click and the volume of the main output, the main, what's going on over here. So you can have relative to each other, so you can have more click or less click relative to the sound that your band or yourself are producing. Now you turn the metronome on in the tools menu, which is just here. So go ahead and hit that button, tools, and it's number 1 on the list. You've got other tools in there, tuner, your system settings, date and time, your SD card and all that, but the metronome function is the first one on the list, and you hit enter to get into it. You've then a range of options to do with the metronome. At the minute, the very first option is the metronome on or is it off? At the moment it's set to off. The next one is level, between 0 and 100 I think it is again, so you can turn the level of the metronome up or down. It's panned at the minute dead center, so you can pan it to the left or to the right. The sound is currently set to a bell. If you hit enter, if you move the jog wheel, you can adjust that to a click, a stick, a cowbell, and lots of other things. But including, interestingly enough, any of your tracks that you've recorded, or any of your stereo tracks. So you go all the way up to 24, and then you're given tracks 1, 2, tracks 3, 4, tracks 5, 6. So you can even assign a stereo file as the metronome sound. I don't know why you'd want to do that, but I guess there are practical applications for it. So the normal ones you're going to be using a bell, click, that kind of thing. Okay, so you can adjust the tone, the sound of the metronome itself. And actually, thinking about it, if you look on the forums, there are some very creative uses of the metronome sound by using the tracks assigned to the metronome to give essentially an additional output that you can only send to headphones if you wish. So there are some, if you think about it, there are some quite creative uses for the metronome over and above a straightforward metronome function. It's essentially another out that you can direct, whether it goes to just the pair of headphones or the output and the headphones, which is quite handy, I guess. And you can obviously adjust the relative level of it here again, like I've already mentioned. Next, you have a pre-count function on or off, and if you turn that to on, you can then choose whether you have a 4 count, a 5 count, a 6 count, whatever, before the thing starts recording. So in other words, it'll give you a count in 1, 2, 3, 4, and then it'll start recording. So that's a pre-count function there, which again can be quite handy, I guess, and you're back to the top. So that's how you turn the metronome on or off, adjust the sound and everything else. Now the tempo, the speed at which the metronome clicks or beeps, is set by a dedicated button here with tempo written above it. Whenever you're recording anything on the R24, whether or not you're using the metronome, this red tempo light always flashes. If you're not using the metronome, you can just ignore it. But if you're using the metronome, it's also a visual indication of the tempo of the song. So it's quite handy, I guess, for that reason. You've two options to set the tempo using this button. Option number 1, and the only one I've used so far, is you hit the button, the tempo comes up on the screen, and you've then a limited amount of time, a few seconds, to start messing with the jog wheel to adjust the tempo, or else it goes back to the home screen automatically. Once you start moving the jog wheel, then the timer stops. You've got all day, all day to set what tempo you want, but you need to start moving that jog wheel within a few seconds. And the tempo shows here on the home screen, currently set by default at 120 beats per minute, 120 BPM. Your other option for setting the tempo of your project is to do what's called a tap tempo function. Handy, I guess, if you're listening to maybe a song on the radio, you're not actually sure what tempo it's at, but you can tap along to it, and then this will calculate the average value and set that as the tempo for the song. And the way you do that is just by tapping the tempo button repeatedly and then letting it go, and it will calculate the average and set that as the tempo for your project. So go on ahead and hit that, and then just keep pressing it in time with your song, and then let go after you've done it for so long, and it will set the average tempo, and that's come up at 107.3. I suppose you could go in if you wished and bring that down to 107, so it's a nice even number, not that it really matters, but that's now set the project to 107 BPM using the tap tempo function, which is quite handy. Now again, why would you want to use that? Well, obviously if you're in a band setting and you want to send a click to your drummer and he or she can play to a click track, then you can use that for recording. Like generally speaking, live recordings, the tempo doesn't really matter that much. You are going to naturally drift in and out of time, and it's going to get quicker and slower in parts. No one's going to care, no one's going to even notice, because you're there seeing a live band. And you're playing live, and no one's going to be sitting there scratching their head going, well, hang on a minute, that started out at 108 BPM and now it's creeped up to 112. No one's going to notice. So for a live setting, it doesn't really matter. I think really where it comes in is when you're recording. Obviously, if someone's listening back to this as a recording, then you want it consistent tempo throughout. So the click track might be a good idea. The way I've used it the most, and one of the biggest advantages I can see, is the quantize function on the Zoom. And again, what that means in plain English is I do a lot of sort of acoustic stuff, 2 inputs, 1 acoustic guitar and 1 microphone. Now then later on I may go and grab a bass and lay a bass track down, and then later on again I may want to use the inbuilt drum loops in either the rhythm section here, or on the little memory stick that came with the R24, to put in some backing drums or some drum fills or whatever, just to spice up the song a bit and make it sound a bit more interesting. If you've recorded to a click track and your guitar and vocal and bass parts are a consistent tempo the whole way throughout, it gives the rhythm tracks and the drum loops a point of reference, and both will be synchronized in time, because the drum track will sync to whatever BPM the project is set to. Instead of using seconds and minutes and all this kind of thing to try and find your way around a song or try and lay tracks down together, you're then tied to beats and bars, which is the way most people measure where you are in a song, and it's certainly the way the rhythm patterns on this particular device work. That look, for example, if you're trying to introduce a drum fill and you hold down the pad to play the fill, we'll look at this later on when we're looking at rhythm patterns. You're holding down the pad will resist coming in with the drum fill until the start of the next bar, so it will do that for you automatically. So in other words, you don't have to be bang on in pressing this to bring the drum fill in. The machine will do it for you automatically. It will quantize automatically with the bars and beats that the project is set for. And obviously, if you've recorded the whole project to a click track, then your guitar and vocal will also be in time with the tempo of the project. So everything lines up quite nicely if you're recording to a click track, and it's for that reason I would recommend that you do it. It's a bit weird to start with if you've never done it before. It's a bit like patting your head and rubbing your stomach, I suppose. But once you get used to it, it is the way to go, especially if you're going to lay down drum parts later on. If you're not going to do that, then don't worry about it. Just record whatever you want. Leave the metronome function off and leave the tempo function off. Just ignore the red flashing light, and I do that sometimes as well. But that's how you would use it, and that's some of the benefits again for using the metronome function and the tempo function on the R24 to set a tempo, a BPM for the project.